and welcome to episode 14 of HardcoreGaming101.net's top 47,858 games of all time podcast, where we objectively, definitively, and scientifically rank the games you nominate on Twitter. My name is Xerxes, and actually my blood pressure is astonishingly excellent. My panelists today are...
I'm Bobinator.
I'm Carl.
I'm Satanga.
On this podcast, we have three rules. Ulre, Umberne, Unlay. All rankings are final, official, and scientifically accurate. Ulre, Umberne, Ute. You can nominate one game at a time via Twitter by hitting me up at GC9X. Ulre, Umberne, Ithre. You can nominate games that have already been nominated, but please don't nominate games we've already ranked. You want to see the master list for yourself? Check it out. bit.ly/47k games. That's bit.ly/47k games.
Don't forget, by the way, that if you like our audio podcast, you might want to visit our YouTube channel as well.
That's right.
Bob puts a lot of effort into recording gameplay
really
footage
good.
to put alongside these.
I watch them because I'm a staggering narcissist, but you can watch them because you just enjoy the show and give us a thumbs up or whatever you do on the YouTube. Or
Sometimes they do. Like, there's at least 6 people that thumbs up our videos, and those are my favorite people.
Our first game for the show is Pulseman, which was nominated by @KKickflip and @MeatDimensionTJ. It was developed by Game Freak and published by Sega for the Sega Genesis, actually, I would say the Sega Mega Drive, in Japan only.
Actually, apparently, if you have the Sega channel, you get it from there.
So
there was a limited period of time where you could have played it.
The likelihood that one of the 12 people in the world who had the Sega channel are listening to the show is actually probably pretty high.
I mean, the big question was it available in Brazil?
Yeah, but it was like changed to like the Monica's Gang or something like that.
Yeah,
So
I know.
Pulseman's really part of the Wonder Boy series by proxy.
Yes, it is.
But
the rabbit hole.
it was also actually released on the Virtual Console, I believe, on the Wii. They finally released it to normal audiences outside of Japan, I believe, in 2008 or 2009. So,
but don't worry, kids, you can still steal it.
Yeah, this English translation that you can steal it with, which is great.
How much of it needed to be translated? Not that much, right?
I think it was literally just the sort of level intro things where they're like, this is what's going on in this level.
Yeah. It's kind of weird because there's a lot of English voice acting anyway, so...
Yeah,
that's always the case with these games that don't get localized. There's no excuse for it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, this is not unlike Sin and Punishment, which we covered a few episodes ago.
Well,
yeah,
it makes sense that it would have English in it, because it is a Sega game, and the Sega system, they love to have English in everything, even if it wasn't intended for English audiences.
I think it's just like their arcade tradition.
Yeah,
because arcade games would just have English in them no matter what.
That was to make them easier to localize to the bigger U.S. market or the U.S. market.
I gotta say something about Pulseman.
If you have to.
We can't beat around the bush. This game's backstory involves a guy who boned a computer.
It's not just he boned a computer. He invented a computer, then decided it was so hot he had to bone it. So he turned himself into electricity to go into the computer and bone it. That's the plot. You play as his son.
So it's Tron.
Isn't... I'm sorry to drop this word, but doesn't that technically make Pulseman the product of incest?
It is kind of a...
No, because if you created a human being from scratch and not like the usual way, but like the test tube way, just by like combining like genetic Legos or something,
it'd be called
then you could, that's totally legit.
That's a movie. It's called Splice. You can look it up. You can go watch it. Don't do that.
Or Weird Science, right?
Science had that. They did that in that.
From my heart and from my hand, why don't people understand?
But yeah, so that's Pulseman. You play as this product of Robocest. It's a platformer, pretty good, 1994. I like it, actually. It's got a lot of very painful screen effects, like they're trying to kill you with lights and flashing stuff.
Especially Casino in Stage 3. That kind of hurts to look at for too long.
I like it. Like there's like an evolution of like sort of the Sonic aesthetic, where it's like let's make it even more abstract and more brain-meltingly bright and searing and constant flashing. And it even has like all these raster effects, like the screen warps and twists and stuff. And it's got infamous double parallax, where parallax goes in two different directions at once, which basically causes your eyes to split in half.
A real visual orgasm, practically.
It is technically pre-Pokemon Game Freak, right? So they hadn't learned their lesson about
we didn't...
seizure.
That was
hang on, wait, we didn't mention this was developed by Game Freak, did we?
I did, you just weren't paying attention.
Oh, shoot. Well, that would make this then the other major platformer that we covered by Game Freak, Drill Dozer, a few episodes ago. And hey, they developed Yoshi too. We have a Game Freak bias in our selection, I just realized.
You're Game Freaks.
Well, yeah, covering pre-Pokemon Game Freak is actually really interesting because, you know, they did something as crazy as this backstory.
Isn't Tembo the Badass Elephant in our list too?
Somebody did.
Oh, shit.
With Pulseman, I guess the main gimmick with this game is you are Pulseman in the sense that he can actually become electricity, and there's kind of like a few little slight mechanical differences between this and other games. It's a weird sort of platformer, isn't it? Because it's kind of like Sonic-ish in the sense that it's a little bit fast, a lot of bouncing around. I guess kind of like Rocket Knight as well. Yeah. It's kind of that weird sort of...
I was going to say, I would compare this game to both Rocket Knight Adventures and to Ristar. They all three of them sort of have that Sonic-esque aesthetic, but like doing their own mechanics that arguably work better than Sonic. But Bob might fight me on that one, so I'm not going to...
I'm interested in why you would say that.
No,
he doesn't even have anywhere to go with this. He's
got a letter bomb just waiting for the next person who says that.
All right. No,
so, but I mean, I found that this game was a little bit difficult in ways that was hard to sort of figure out. Like, I think maybe it's the view distance, or it's like it constantly asks you to make leaps of faith, and then there's an enemy sitting there, and you get hit. Like,
it's the way Pulseman moves for me that makes me get hit a lot. Because he kind of speeds up kind of suddenly, so it's kind of hard to not just walk into an enemy and get hurt.
Right, because what he does is he has a weird thing where you run fast, run enough distance in one direction, and then he speeds up a little bit and starts glowing, and then you can activate his ability, which turns him into like a ball of electricity, and he shoots off at a 45-degree angle for a bit, and then he can bounce around the room if he hits other walls. Makes a lot of sense in practice. It's kind of hard to visualize, but it makes a lot of sense when you actually play the game.
Imagine like the ball from Arkanoid, and that's basically it. Because there's a bonus stage that's basically Arkanoid.
Every stage has a nice gimmick or twist to it, I think. You know, you've got like the electric wiring that you can connect to and then you jump between, which is really, like, that's kind of cool. You've got the casino level is kind of like really condensed, so you bounce around a lot in it. They've taken like what you can physically do in the game and presented individual challenges for it, which is quite cool.
If I had to make one complaint, I'd say they don't really use each gimmick enough. Like, once you see it's basically, for the most part, gone. It feels kind of like a waste.
But the game's quite short, isn't it? I think it's only like 5 or 6 stages, right? It's not a big game.
7, yeah. It should only take you approximately an hour to beat, although it does get pretty challenging in later levels.
The system is kind of asshole-ish, I think. Like, if you lose all your lives, you kind of just get booted back to the stage select screen or something. It's a little... Then you can go back into the level, but not at the start. Sorry if this is confusing, it's just I found the continue system weird. Is there much else about it other than there are bosses? They're okay.
Well, can we describe some of those gimmicks that only show up for one level?
Yeah.
First off, there's the water. Apparently it can destroy Pulseman, but that's not really right. It's more like water can mildly inconvenience Pulseman.
Yeah, that's right. There is actually inevitably the 6th stage, I think, primarily takes place underwater, so you just kind of have to leg it just by punching things instead of shocking them.
Right.
That's the point where the game feels like it's just trying to dump on you, because like Monster World 4 did a similar thing where you get really used to having the Pepe Le Pew around to help your jumps, and then spoilers, he is then not around at some point for the rest of the game, and then it's like the game really punishes you with these jumps that would have been easier if you had him, but now you don't, so it feels like they're just kind of rubbing your face in the dirt. And that's sort of carries on into Pulseman's designs at some point. They're not trying to necessarily irritate you for their levels, but it does feel like there are almost too many antipieces that make it feel a little inconsistent at times. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I appreciate the variety, but like it also feels like I had to keep learning how to play each stage all over again. I mean, the finale's a damn auto-scroller, and I tend to hate those. I don't know. Do you think this game is authentically challenging, or that it's more cheap?
I don't think it's, like, incredibly difficult.
I think it does tend to... It does make you make leaps of faith, I think, more than actually being too challenging. It kind of just gets you with like a new boss pattern or like a thing that you don't understand yet, and that's why you die. It's not like once you know what you're supposed to do, it isn't too challenging. There's some weird stuff like some enemies you have to crouch to attack, and the crouch attack is really weird. He kind of kicks out, and then the frames, it doesn't actually hit until like halfway through the kick out frame. It's very strange. Like the timing is all weird. That's just like, there are little bits and pieces of the game that don't feel completely like, not as tight as you would expect from like a 16-bit platform. Like you usually expect them to be like super, like everything fits and it's like really, really, really well made, especially for like 1994. And this game looks really nice. Like you expect this game to be like
it pulls
razor
like
tight.
Every graphical trick you can think of just short of Mode 7. But it's probably for the best it didn't have Mode 7, because some levels might look like a mohawk and headphone.
Man, I can't imagine what these guys would have done with more like visual effects at their commands. Like they would have just gone completely off the wall. Like it would have been headphone jack up in here, right?
Yeah, exactly. Occasionally it almost looks like demo scene in the background. It's very impressive to say the least. I do want to say that
on the subject of demo scene, I don't really remember the music. It was okay.
There's some good parts,
remember?
but some tracks repeated. I actually thought a good chunk of the soundtrack was kind of nightmarish. Like, I don't know, this game had a kind of like spooky atmosphere to it in times. Like you're just in this big space and there is like complete black background with this sort of like, I don't know, industrial hum for a soundtrack, and these lights just keep flashing off. I don't know, it does feel creepy at some points, and like I don't know if that's just prediction for Game Freak doing really creepy things with Pokemon. So to answer your question, soundtrack is certainly passable, but nothing quite as catchy as Sonic.
This was a solid 1994 effort. It's a shame that it didn't get taken across. I assume because Sega were under some bizarre blanket rule to just not give foreigners any games in 1994, 95. So
yeah, we got screwed out of Alien Soldier as well, and that one I'm kind of bitterer about. Pulseman, I think is a very good fast-paced platformer. Kind of iffy with its difficulty at times, but yeah, it's not like super hard. It just feels like it's being cheap at some points, but certainly nothing beatable except the last boss I actually kind of struggled.
I want to say one thing. So you know how you get your electricity by moving far enough? Mm-hmm. I like how that works, but the way your dash works, you double tap left or right and you just dash, you're invincible.
Yeah.
But you basically have don't need to have any space, so it feels kind of cheap because it's basically instant charge. You can have whenever you want. Did anyone else notice that, or was it just me?
The game doesn't have a completely... like, they didn't have a complete sense of what they were doing. They had some really cool ideas, and then they didn't quite fit them all together properly. It's just kind of like, it'd be cool, a dash. All right, cool, put it in. Like, and I think that's the amount of thought they put into the dash.
So where are we thinking to put this one? It's kind of a tough call, right?
I think it is on its merits a very good game, but it feels like it needs to do something more to be considered like a true Sega classic. I can't explain how. It just seems to like miss the mark by a very small sliver. I mean, I don't mean to sound so down on Pulseman. I really enjoyed playing it, but compared to Rocket Knight Adventures or Ristar, I thought those two games were better.
I also kind of noticed there was no Dogs Bower or Dogs Bower-esque character, which makes me feel like it might be below Blue Stinger.
So
however,
you can't keep bringing it up every single episode.
No, it gets funnier the more I repeat myself.
Well, there is another podcast that keeps bringing up Danny Sullivan's Indie Heat as a running gag, so we can make Dogs Bower.
I mean, I guess until people loudly complain to Xerxes to cut it out, he's not going to stop. He's not going to stop people. You have to stop him.
I don't want him to stop. I just wanted to note that.
I mean, I do agree in the sense that
if Dog's Bauer, I mean, it is the kind of thing he would do. Like, if he was really attracted to a computer, he probably would transform himself into pure energy so he could enter the computer and then have sex with it.
I do have to. I really hate to.
He's very close to having sex with his daughter, so it's a Dog's Bauer. Like,
yeah, I mean, really, okay. So
he did kind of hit on Janine, didn't he? Now I think about it.
I agree in the sense that not about Dog's Bauer specifically, but Pulseman is a good game. It doesn't feel great. It's just like, wow, this is really good.
I want to stick it above UN Squadron. What do you guys think? Is that too low? I don't know.
Bob, you can't keep using UN Squadron as the metric.
I just love every time we look at UN Squadron, we're like, oh yeah, you know what? Let's put it above you. No,
to be fair, I think a lot of games are going to fall in the space we have between Blue Stinger and UN Squadron. There's like 6, 7 big at this point. I
think that's really high for Pulseman. Like,
I do too. I feel like this is like in the Techno Cop Rainbow Islands neighborhood.
I think that's a little low, but I like where you're
harsh.
Hang on.
Okay. So Clash at Demon Head, I would put it right below Clash at Demon Head, right above Uniracers.
I'd say this is easier for people to get in than Demon Head. My suggestion, I was going to say between G.I. Joe and Tapper.
Yeah, all right.
Well, I mean,
that might be
that's a little high. I mean,
is this game better than Donkey Kong Country 3?
Okay, all right, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, yeah, okay, but I put it below Zookeeper.
Okay, I'm happy with that.
Between Zookeeper and DKC 3, then.
Yeah, I think I'm cool with that.
Hey, I'm good with that too.
I mean, let's just put it this way. Like, I feel like we've given Game Freak its due by noting how awesome Drill Dozer is, and this game is far afield from Drill Dozer. It is no Drill Dozer.
It's, I guess, maybe a blueprint for Drill Dozer.
It is, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of like it's got an interesting gimmick, but I don't feel like they build on it enough.
Pulseman is like one of those games, especially like on the Mega Drive, which had a slightly smaller library. Like, I would definitely say, yeah, play it. It's good. You'll probably enjoy it. But you won't be like, man, I've got to recommend this game. Like, no. You play it, you enjoy it, but you don't care.
Yeah, I'll say again that for a game like this, I feel that Rocket Knight Adventures does better.
Yeah, the Genesis has, like, so many good platformers. Pulseman has a lot of competition.
And I apologize for my prior statements. I would say that most of the Sonic games in the Genesis are definitely better than Pulseman, if not all. But
Sonic's 3D Blast.
Oh, okay, most. No, I still think it's quite good. It's just a shame that its biggest takeaway is its incredibly foobar backstory, which...
I wonder if that was why they didn't translate it. Like, someone handed them the treatment of the plot, and they just looked at it and were like, what? We can't keep this?
That's, wow, I never actually thought of that before. This is around the time when the ESRB was starting to become a thing, too.
I mean, to be fair,
what would the, like, rating be, though? What would it say underneath the rating? It'd say, like, T for teen, like
implied incest with robots?
I think the rating back then was...
Confusing electronic thing romance?
I want to say the rating back then might have been MA13.
It would have gotten the Deepwater label. Remember that?
Oh my god, I can't think of any other games that applied to outside of Eternal Champions.
It's two games on
Duke Nukem 3D and Experts, and that was it.
Yeah.
The Experts, the really horrible Eternal Champions.
Well, let's go out on the Deepwater label. Let's lock that.
All right, so up next is Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, which was nominated by @BluesDance on Twitter. It was developed and published by Broderbund and released for everything in 1985, 1986, around that range. I think it was updated again in 1989, and probably had to be updated again for the CD-ROM after the
This game is like 5 or 6 completely unique
collapse
versions.
of the Soviet Union. Kind of put a big monkey wrench in that, didn't it? Although I don't know whether it really affected anything. You just got an updated world atlas map fact thing.
It wasn't one of those games that was originally released for the Apple II.
Was it?
Well, that was one of the very few first systems, if not the original. It came out around the time for MS-DOS, the Commodore 64.
You know, it probably came out simultaneously for Apple II and DOS. And
Yeah.
because when you look at the box, this is back when they used to have little stickers on the front that would just have it would just tell you which version it was. And the box would otherwise be the same. And it came with like a multi-purpose manual that had instructions for all the different, like at least 4 different platforms or something like that. I'm pretty sure that's what the manual did, because that's what I was looking at. It had Apple II installation instructions on it, as well as DOS.
But yeah, just to say real quick, I'm not going to go on like all the differences because that would take forever, but I'm pretty sure it's like 5 or 6 unique versions of this game.
But they're not
I'm not telling like ports. I mean,
terribly different, right? None of them add like actual new gameplay elements.
actually,
One of them,
if you're probably like the weirdest version is the Master System version because it's somewhat more of a game. Like people actually you actually have like a character you move around on the map, and people actually come out and shoot at you, and you have to dodge it.
Yeah, you have to jump and or duck knives and or bullets until the suspect gets caught. That's a weird element that they put into and my thoughts on it are sort of mixed because
These kids are learning too much.
Hey,
Stimulate them.
That's a good point. Because before it was just completely conducted through menus in most versions, which I guess might be seen as boring for those who own consoles. Like computers were considered to have more like thinking man's games until the Prince of Persia came around. Mostly cerebral quiz stuff, edutainment like this. Math Blasters, for example, I guess that was around that time. But I'm not sure if we wanted to get into the differences too much so soon, but that's like the big one there.
So, yeah, I mean, this is kind of like this and Oregon Trail are sort of like the ultimate edutainment games, 80s edutainment games. They are like the reason why computer labs existed in elementary schools for a long time.
I would say this one was a little bigger because unlike Oregon Trail, which is very American, where in the world in Sandiego? Hey, look! Not everyone can live in the glorious Republic of the United States.
Like a palette swap and just pretend it's Australia and you're subjugating and destroying
the Burke and Wills Trail. Nobody wants to do the Burke and Wills Trail. That was not a happy adventure. Everyone dies at the end. That's what happens. Carmen Sandiego, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? That was a game that works anywhere. You could be any language, anywhere. You can play Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego because it's a global spanning adventure that teaches you about stuff.
About countries that aren't the United States.
It also teaches you about the United States. It doesn't care. It teaches you as much as it
one
can.
Part of the United States. New York City, which is like the least representative of the rest of the country.
It's the most and least at the same time, in a way.
It has nothing to do with the rest of the country.
Well, I mean, okay, I don't know, because we played, or at least I played the Windows 95, Windows 3.1 version. Like, I think that's the last major version they released is the one that I played.
That's what I played, too.
Probably had a couple more cities in it then, I guess.
It didn't have cities, but they mention... Like, lots of characters will mention, like, locations. Like, they mention the Yukon Trail, which is in Canada, but you don't actually go to the Yukon Trail. You go to some just arbitrary part of Canada. I can't remember which city you end up in. But it basically, lots of characters will mention locations and things that are not at the city you visit. So I guess we should probably explain why you're visiting cities.
Yeah, what's this game about? What is this?
This game is like, it's an edutainment game. It's basically kind of like menu-based. It involves a lot of looking at books and other reference material. Or if you're playing it now, typing stuff into Wikipedia.
Yeah, I feel like if this game came out now, you'd give you like a mini web browser you'd have to use.
Well, I didn't want to really jump forward that far, but I was going to say there's a reason they don't make this game anymore, I think, and it's basically because it's rendered obsolete by the internet.
So, right. So, I mean, the interesting thing about this game is it came packaged with two things, I think. One was the instruction manual, which also included like a dossier on about around 10-ish separate criminals, and it would tell you stuff about those criminals, like what their likes and dislikes are. It's kind of like a criminal dating service, really. Because it just had like all their this is what they're interested in, and this person likes to go mountain climbing, and these 5 people like Mexican food, and that kind of thing.
I think my favorite clue, one that I kept getting a lot, was that this perp doesn't like dangerous sports. That apparently indicates that croquet is their hobby. So
croquet can be pretty dangerous. I mean, the game involves gigantic mallets.
Have you seen the cover to Nursery Crime by Genesis? That girl is using heads. Human heads as croquet balls. It's effed up.
Wow, that Genesis. Definitely worth listening to now.
Is that a shot? I genuinely like them. You dumped on Jethro Tull and Genesis. Dude, come on.
What? Whose dad are you? Why do you like this music? What is going on?
You like the Beatles. They're older.
Everybody likes the Beatles. Everybody also likes Sunshine.
Jethro Tull, the Beatles. It's where in the world is
So Carmen Sandiego is an entertainment game.
So you'll find out at the beginning you are a member of the Acme Detective Agency, which is, I guess, how crimes get solved now. And
it's kind of like Interpol that doesn't have to obey any international laws.
It used to be Interpol.
Did it?
You go to Interpol bases or something, or you contact Interpol to get warrants and stuff. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. So you'll get each session or something of the game starts out with say, the Staten Island ferry has been stolen somehow from New York City.
How does that work? Like, do they have a tractor beam or what?
Well, one of them steals the Yeti, I think, right? So I don't know. There's all kinds of logistics here that I'm not really sure.
I love that. It's one of my favorite parts of the game is they steal the most ludicrous things, just like giant staircases from famous monuments and stuff. And it's just
steal entire buildings at some point. I can't remember.
From Canada, they steal the recipe for maple syrup.
They steal things that are abstract. I think when I was playing it, they stole kind of like a tunnel or something, so people could not physically get from place to place. And it's just what? Man, how do you steal air?
Kind of like Wile E. Coyote style. You go through the tunnel and then you kind of hang a hook on the end of it as you go out, and it just pulls the whole thing inside out.
I was going to say that's a pretty vile thing to do, and I remembered you're fighting.
Oh yeah, they're all agents of Vile, which is I think probably it's pretty Get Smart-esque.
It does have this sort of Get Smart or James Bond-ish sort of definitely a love letter to those sort of spy things, right. But very much toned down for kids. Nothing is very heinous or anything. It's just very, very lighthearted.
Not a lot of sexual innuendo in the.
They do shoot guns and throw knives at you. That's kind of
that depends on the early versions, right? Different versions have different threats. The late 95, 94 release doesn't. You don't get shot at. I definitely think they might have toned it down a bit to try and encourage schools and stuff to stock it, because I don't think schools probably wanted games where kids get stabbed with knives. That's probably. I
don't think you get stabbed though. It's just a knife just flies into the wall, and that's how you've gotten close.
Yeah.
It's just a cute little animation thing. But anyway, so the whole game is built around discovering clues, and basically you're just, at least in this version of the game, you're just trying to find 2 sets of clues. One is the clue to where the bad guy went to next, and usually it's I saw them get on a yacht with a blue and white flag on it or something. You're just oh, what? And so you look at your World Almanac, which is the other book that came with the game, including I think the even the Super Nintendo version of the game or something. No, maybe not. Maybe that had an in-game almanac. But I know one of the Carmen Sandiego NES games came with this giant book, and so the box is actually kind of weirdly shaped.
I know the 95 version actually has an in-game almanac, which is why I would prefer to play that version over any other.
Although, like I said, you could just use Wikipedia, which is...
Well, yeah, I mean,
to be fair, this is a game for 10-year-olds, so a lot of the stuff in it you'll probably be able to figure out on your own.
If you've had a formal education in the United States of America, you will probably have learned.
How do they educate you in Australia where you don't know? Like,
I legitimately played the version that I played, like the 95's Windows. I legitimately played that game in school, in primary school.
I'm sure you guys were dying to know. VIL stands for Villains International League of Evil.
It was evil. We did it.
Villains International League of Evil.
Yeah,
Villains International. Oh, I see. Like Villains International League of Evil.
Yeah, but it's not Vilio. It's they just don't include
Villains International. So it's like probably a merger between the Villains International Inc.
the
League of Evil LLC. Yeah.
You have to profile your criminal while you track them down.
You try to figure out. So they'll give you clues. Like I saw them. Like you'll talk when you get to a new city. As long as you went to the right city, you can check. They'll have like a couple different places you can go to. And then you go there and they'll say, like, someone will say, I saw the suspect. It's always the same stuff. Like, I saw the suspect the suspect said she really likes Mexican food, which seemed to come up all the time. Or I saw the suspect had a tattoo or something like that. And then, so the more details you get on the suspect's identity, you can go to Interpol and apply those details. Then it will kind of weed down, like, which possible crooks it could be in this gang. After you've got a warrant, you can just look for clues of where they're going next, and you try to catch up. Once you finally catch up with them, then they'll get arrested, and you win. And after you win so many cases, your rank will go up. And then at a certain point, you get to go after Carmen Sandiego, who probably just does the same thing, but even more so. I can't really remember.
Right. The SNES and Genesis versions have 30 cases. I don't know about the others.
I think I played through about 8 or 9 on the PC release. I didn't get the Carmen Sandiego, though she does call you up and taunt you as you arrest more and more crooks. She says, "You'll never catch me." And then there's some, I don't know if it's the same in all the other versions, but there's like a meta element. As you solve cases, you get faxes that are like hints to finding Carmen Sandiego, I think, in the late PC release. I don't know if anyone got far enough in that, but they actually hand you details about Carmen Sandiego, I think, which is kind of cool. So you're encouraged to keep playing with an FMV woman who talks to you about the cases, which is really...
That's the chief from the game show version.
Oh, yeah. If you wanted to discuss the game show for one.
The problem is that looking for information takes time. You have like a pretty limited amount, so you really got to know what you're doing, or you're going to run out of time and lose your person.
Right, yeah. So every place you go or thing you do eats up a little bit of time. And if it takes time to travel, it takes time to, I guess, walk to the municipal center or whatever, like the generic places you go to are, and et cetera. And it takes time to, like, you eat up a little bit of time applying for a warrant and stuff like that. And you've usually got, I think it's, at least as far as I played into the game, I played about maybe 10 cases the other day. And it was always about, I think they give you, like, you start on a Monday and you have to finish by like 5 p.m. on Sunday, because after that, as we all know, criminals are just gone forever and you'll never catch them again.
Well, the plot on the version I had was that if you didn't catch them, they were going to hand off what they stole to Carmen Sandiego. And once Carmen Sandiego got it, that was it. Like that was she's going to fence it or something. It was gone. So you had to catch them before Carmen Sandiego disappeared forever with whatever they stole.
Or you could just put out like an APB. Hey, if somebody's selling a Yeti, let the police know about it.
I love that, like, all the locations, people know, like, the criminal, and sometimes they seem, like, really intimate, like, oh, I was having brunch with the criminal, and they said that they were going to go to France.
Talking to these people, why do they only give you, like, one bit of information at a time?
Yeah, like, if you're close enough to them to know they have a tattoo, you could probably also tell me what their hair color is.
Yeah, and don't tell me in pun form, thank you.
They're actually really well written. Like, the dialogue is interesting. The words, and they use a lot of, like, not standard words. Like, if they, instead of using, like, like hair or something, they might say locks or just another word for hair, and they'll constantly throw at you, like, more complicated words. So it's not just about teaching some vague geography and some vague city stuff. They do actually try and expand your vocabulary as well. So,
or they just really wanted to make third graders feel stupid.
Well, I think that one of the ways it does this is to make kids feel stupid. It's important. You got to make sure that you got to keep them down all the time.
I want to go into segue a bit. I do admit there are times when I have gotten a bit had trouble with this game. Some of the clues can be kind of weird and obscure. Like, one example, I had two clues that said that they were going somewhere with a red, white, and blue flag, and a place where they had dollars. Turns out it was Australia.
That's true. We have those.
Yeah,
You
Get
up
your
there.
own money.
They do kind of throw curveballs at you like that. I think I got tripped up having gone to Canada by accident with dollars, as far as that's concerned.
Well, yeah, because I mean,
you're supposed to weed out these things. That's why you've got your world almanac thing that it comes with, which I believe is like a real functional book. Like one of the weirder ones I find is like where you find out what kind of like precious metals or something that they are interested in mining. Like I hear your suspect is really interested in like nickel or something like that, and that means that's Montreal or something. You know,
I have got a real hankering for bismuth. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like, that's part of the thing is, like, you're not supposed to really, like, you're not supposed to ask, like, get one clue from someone and be like, okay, I know where to go. You are supposed to, like, kind of balance how many questions you ask the various people, because that obviously takes time.
In fact, I think all of the countries chosen and all of the suspect, like, fake bios and stuff are made so that there could be more than one answer if you just look at one clue. So
The thing that annoys me, I really hate it when you know where you're like supposed to be going next, but you're really trying to find information what they look like and no one's giving it up.
Yeah, I've come across this too. How much they tell you can be a crapshoot sometimes. Like, you don't get enough to narrow it down to one suspect before you get to the suspect.
You really have to look carefully at those character bios. I had the same problem at first, and I was like, oh, you just really got to pay attention to those character bios. And because usually the cool thing is that when you're applying for a warrant, I love how we're all adults talking about how challenging this like kids game. Like it's
game
probably
is
when we were 8
intended
years
to
old, we had
challenge
no
children,
problem.
Though it's not a traditional game. It's not the same.
Right.
Like
I mean, it's supposed to trick them into reading and learning. Yeah, you really have to. You have to pay attention to those things. But the cool thing is that when you apply for a warrant, it'll like narrow it down for you. So it'll say like, well, I know that their hair is red and that it's a woman. And then it will just narrow it down to like whose hair is red and who's a woman. And then you can read those two bios. And then the next place you go to, you'll probably be able to figure it out. I always got a warrant really early on, usually by the second city.
I guess we should point this out because I think Bob may be trying to point it out, is that different versions, I think the early versions you have criminal bios, but by the time you get to the last version, the criminals don't have a specific identity. Instead, they feed you their looks and their apparel, and you have to actually narrow it down to exactly every aspect of it and then get a warrant for exactly what they look like. Then when you go to the final location, you have to find someone who matches that exact description.
Oh, okay. So that is...
What I was going to say, though, is you actually have to be really careful with your warrant, because it's possible you can get the wrong warrant, and when you find the guy you've been trying to catch, then you lose the case because you found the wrong guy.
Then you got a Section 1983 suit to deal with, and it's a whole other problem.
If you don't get a warrant and you try and arrest the person, even if you're right, they'll say, you don't have a warrant, and you lose. You immediately lose the case, and there's this whole thing.
In spite of all that, did anyone at any point feel like the game was deliberately trying to pull a gotcha on you, as far as just really trying to trip you up with
I noticed that almost every female suspect loves tennis.
That sounds like kind of a stereotype almost.
Well, I mean, it's just there's only so many details they have in there.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Their hobbies are croquet, tennis, mountain climbing, and maybe like two other things or something like that. And so and because right from the beginning that you're always told the sex of the criminal, it's like that's one detail already. So you find like there's like all the male suspects have like a lot of the same traits, and all the female suspects have a lot of the same. It seems like something that they probably intended to have a little bit more differentiation there, and then it just made the game too easy. So they had to make the criminals more samey. And then evidently they found a solution to that by just changing the whole way they do criminals.
Yeah, they changed the mechanism.
Did anyone legitimately learn anything about geography playing this?
That's a good question. How educational is this educainment game really?
I mean, that's one of the things. I think that the part of the trick is that, at least in the earlier versions of the game, is that the World Almanac has a bunch of superfluous information which you don't actually need to solve any of the crimes, I think, ever. But you will learn because you got to look through these things until you memorize those facts. And sure enough, you will memorize the facts of the game after playing for like an hour. There's a lot of stuff you'll learn.
That they do, like, you know, I had to look up, like one of the areas I got was like, oh, they're in some desert, and I'm like, oh crap, desert. All right, I'll look up desert. So I typed desert into the search in the Aramaic on the version, and then it's like 42 responses, and I'm like, so I had to click through a whole bunch of information on deserts, and you can be sure that not every one of those deserts is going to come up in the game, but they're there, and they'll tell you information.
You will know.
And
you will be
like,
yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Is like, by teaching kids to be vaguely aware that Montreal is on the St. Lawrence River, did you really teach them anything? Like,
I will admit something. I didn't know what San Marino or the Union of the Comoros was before playing this. Then again, world geography is an incredibly poor subject I have on Jeopardy, so maybe I'm just an idiot. I don't know.
That was kind of cool. It's like they didn't place like the cities, even in the oldest versions of the game. There's not that many places you can go to, but they didn't make them like all the obvious spots. It's not like every place is like Tokyo.
It's pretty good as far as edutainment games go. Most edutainment games are either like really, really obvious about edutainment, like Math Blaster is like, you're learning math. Like, it's really clear and obvious. Whereas Carmen Sandiego, I think it's great that it kind of like, well, Carmen Sandiego is in a place with lots of llamas, and it's like, I guess I need to learn where the llamas are at. Like, it encourages you to learn without quite fixating you on learning.
So, I mean, I think we've kind of sidled our way into the ranking segment of this.
Mm-hmm. May I say one more thing?
Yes.
I might have touched on this already, but the 95 version also has a FMV Lynn Thigpen, the chief from the game show version of the game, which I'd also say is a plus in its favor.
The Warriors have made their way to Morningside Park. Yes. Look out, Warriors.
Wait, she was in the Warriors?
Yeah, she's the DJ.
You only see her lips. It's awesome.
It's pretty cool, though. Her voice is great, and it's great in Carmen Sandiego. It adds a lot of theme,
Listen
I guess.
Up, gumshoes.
Yeah, I don't understand why she wasn't
says that. She literally says that. I don't know if you pick it up.
Yeah, I don't understand why she wasn't just the overall host. Instead, it was just like some guy as the host, and she was the chief.
Listen, Lick Thigpen's got a busy schedule. You want Lick Thigpen's time? You better have the dime.
This is going to be tricky. We have like nothing else to base this off of. This is our first edutainment game.
I thought a lot about how to rank this because, like,
that's true. We gotta kind of imagine that we're like no more than 10 years old and living like before the internet. And,
I mean, this game is definitely a product of its time. It doesn't work today. That's unfortunate.
Kind of,
it's really good.
If you do have to look it up, like if you have to look up like what the like chief like metal exports of Mali are, like you will still have to learn that fact. Like, in
the good thing is a lot of the facts in the game are not too topical. Like, it's a lot of stuff that's kind of like, yeah, it's probably true now as much as it was 10, 20 years ago.
Czechoslovakia is part of the Soviet Union, which will be around forever.
All right, so we're ranking this. It's a game, but it's also edutainment, and that makes it very hard to measure up against games that are basically, I'm trying to be fun. Fun.
If it's not like, if it's edutainment, it still has to edutain. I guess, so the question is whether you were not just whether you were educated, but also whether you were entertained. Hence, edutainment. Imagine my fingers interlocking when I say that, because that's what I'm doing.
This is like the edutainment game. It was the edutainment to popularize all edutainment. So how should we rate it up just due to its status alone, whether or not it holds up really today?
Well, yeah, I mean...
it's so weird because it's like, what am I like? You know what? I think Where in the World of Carmen Sandiego, is it better than Alien Soldier? Like, you know, like what kind of
That's a good
can
point.
you decide?
Well, look, at the end of the day, you're looking at, does it deliver on its promise? Does it succeed at what it sets out to do?
I don't think there's any question that Carmen Sandiego is genuinely top 5 edutainment games. I mean,
One thing to think about is like how many different versions of the game there are that didn't really change too much about the main formula of the game, which says that the formula was done really well. It was really well executed to begin with. And that's one of the reasons why I played the earliest version of the game, is because I really wanted to see whether like, you know, in 1985, like how sophisticated of a game was it? And it's really good. Like, yeah, you have to look at books, but that's the point. Does it trick you into learning stuff? Yeah, even as an adult, it tricked me into learning a couple things.
Yeah, like that's that's impressive. I think it does exactly what it wants to do. I remember being a kid playing Carmen Sandiego, and I was like, this is fun. You know, I wasn't like, oh, it's teaching me this game sucks. Like, no.
It was fun, and it's got like, you know, like I wish that the characters were a little bit cooler, other than Carmen Sandiego, who is awesome.
I'm going to throw out just a completely arbitrary place, and let's see if we can work from there. Between Super Castlevania 4 and FTL. I don't know why I thought that. It's just the first place my eyes went to.
I would put...
So can we iterate who we need to blame for us having to rank this game? Because this is...
No, I mean, but it's good. Like, I don't know. As like, in terms of edutainment, I'd say I personally, although Oregon Trail is not on the list, I feel like Oregon Trail gives you a lot more, not useful information, but...
Oregon Trail is kind of more of a game.
Well, it's also more of a game, but this is it's a game. Like you have to, you're playing by the rules of the game, and you do have to do the stuff that it's game-like. I mean, it's look. I mean,
it's clever. What it does is it replaces if this was, because I could totally see this being like a modern indie game, but all of the information is just made up, and you just have to read through like made up histories and things, and then learn and then that's what you have to do. This just takes the idea of a game and then goes, okay, but let's make it so that instead of learning about fictional stuff, it's non-fiction, and you're trying to, and that's what works so well about this, is it's like, instead of learning like all this like fantasy details in order to...
undead enemies will get killed if you throw a potion at them, because they're not alive.
Exactly, except instead it's like, well, here's the national currency of Singapore. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the thing is like, look, education is for losers. And losers, no. I mean, look, all the stuff that you're teaching kids is arbitrary, pointless facts that you can look up at any time as an adult, and you don't actually need to know. You don't need to know that...
you don't need to know the primary export of Iceland.
Right. That's right.
It's fish.
But you're teaching them something, and it is better than regular school. And but I would say, like, what I was going to say about Oregon Trail, which is that Oregon Trail actually teaches you some in-depth knowledge about what it was like to be human at a specific time and place in the past that you won't really... I mean, it's kind of giving you a little bit more of something special that only a game could give you. You don't really think about these concerns when you're reading a book. They can tell you that people died of like diarrhea, you know, on the wagon trail, you know, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. But if you like in the game, you're like, oh my God, people like lost their kids doing this stuff. They like, you know, they're like, I'm going to move to, you know, past the Rocky Mountains. That's like a big deal. You know, and you like people lost family. Like you're learning something a little bit about like the human experience at a time that you can't actually live in. That's doing something with edutainment and education that you can't do outside of a video game as easily. Whereas,
I mean, the thing is,
Sandiego is not really doing that much other than just kind of like it's kind of sugarcoating the knowledge pill, I guess.
As I might have mentioned, Oregon Trail is a bit more. It's like American centric in that.
Yeah,
Carmen Sandiego gives you an appreciation for like how big the world is. Like when you play it, you're like,
but what I'm saying is that like what it's teaching you is not necessarily like.
I don't think either game is teaching you that much useful knowledge. It's just knowledge.
I mean, in a way, but I would say like in a way, what Carmen Sandiego teaches you how to do is actually teaches how to read and retain information, which is really directly important. That's the real point of the game, is teaching you how to, which is why I think Papers, Please is one of the greatest edutainment games of all time. I mean, I would put it pretty high. Like I'm saying, like
I'm okay with under Castlevania, I guess.
I'm going to put it under Faster Than Light.
Okay. One space down. I'm all right with that.
I think it's kind of arbitrary because we just, you know.
But it is a fun game. Like I had fun playing it, and I'm a grown man, so like I mean, like
if you haven't actually played Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, I would actually recommend just checking out the PC version because it hasn't aged that much. It's pretty neat.
Also, check out my Carmen Sandiego DeviantArt page.
Well, she sneaks around the world from Kiev to Carolina. She's a sticky-fingered filcher from Berlin down to Belize. She'll take you for a ride on a snowboat to China. Tell me, where in the world is
Carmen Sandiego?
Our next game is Revolution X, which was nominated by @BonusLizard.
I like that name. I don't know why. It just rolls off the tongue really well.
All hate mail to @BonusLizard.
Yeah, he suggested some incredibly interesting games, I'll say. I think he's one of those that took my challenge to lowest ranking game to heart, so I'm not sure if we need more of
Don't
this.
encourage them to do this.
Okay, so, all right. Developed and published by Midway, released for the arcade on May 23rd, 1994, which implies that somebody cared enough about this game to actually note the release date in the arcade, which seems suspicious to me.
Oh, I'm sure Midway had like a trillion flyers. That was kind of their thing, to arcades, and it's just like
So here, okay, so
whatever.
it's a light gun arcade game.
Kind of
think it
like
was
gun.
like-
It's one of those fixed cabinet guns, right? It's not.
Right,
Yeah, like Operation Wolf was probably the genesis of that sort of game. Its framework is more or less based off of a prior Midway game based on Terminator 2. In fact, it is almost exactly that, except that you shoot exploding CDs instead of grenades. As your
Yeah,
specialist.
so
They said music is a weapon. I don't think that's what they meant.
Music is the weapon. I've been
Uh,
sober for 35 years. Rock and roll.
You sound like Dr. Roxo from Metalocalypse.
So this is a licensed game. Has the coveted Aerosmith license. For some reason, in the mid '90s, Aerosmith considered itself like,
You know what we gotta do, guys? Make a video game. That's what all the kids are watching or
Yeah.
playing. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, didn't Aerosmith more or less go on an inexplicably big career revival?
they were
mid-90s?
nobody until they were somebody in the '70s, although nobody was sober enough to remember exactly. I think they're from Boston or some other dump, and I love you, Boston.
None of us are Aerosmith fans, just to get
Well,
out of the way.
actually, I like '70s Aerosmith.
That's fair.
I think they're okay. I mean, the thing is like Aerosmith had this weird career comeback in like the early '90s for some reason, where people pretended like they were a new relevant band. But I think it was mostly because they had those videos with what's her name in them.
Liv Tyler. No, wait.
Yeah.
Steven Tyler's daughter, no less.
So here's the thing about this game. You are some guy who is apparently a fan of Aerosmith, or
Yeah.
two other guys who are Aerosmith
So yeah,
fans.
like some kind of weird
Free,
like
actually,
Gestapo culture. Gestapo kind of has taken over America Land or whatever.
Yeah.
And
America's taken over
they've
by dominatrix.
confiscated all the Aerosmith music. I can't tell whether Aerosmith has been kidnapped or whether they're like the leaders
They're
of the
kidnapped
underground
early on in the
revolution.
game, kind of.
Hi, I'm
Like-
Aerosmith's Joe Perry. You guys need to help us save the music.
So I gotta ask, I'm not a huge fan myself, so were Aerosmith ever particularly anti-authority? Was that their thing?
No, no.
I mean, that's just one of those like generic rock band things, isn't it?
I mean-
Just like we're not for the power, man.
The crazy thing is that this, like, okay, so it's called Revolution X, which is playing on the brief period of marketability for the term Generation X,
Yeah, that this game
which is a generation that was supposed to be too cynical to ever care about this kind of thing. So it was really marketed towards 11-year-olds who I guess would not be, I don't know, I'm kind of a tweener. I don't really fall into either one.
I mean, the setting of the game is kind of ripped out of the 80s. That was kind of the
It is very 80s. It's kind of like more of like a Twisted Sister universe that Aerosmith just kind of invaded, because it's all about like the enslavement of like, I don't know, like bikini car show models or something. And they're like breaking like rocks on like a chain gang and stuff.
They were breaking televisions and arcade machines.
Oh, right. Yeah. All the stuff that kids love, all the stuff that rocks.
This game is just a really weird time capsule.
It is an incredibly cynical marketing bullet aimed directly towards the prefrontal cortex of kids who really did not qualify as being a part of Generation X. The cool thing was, aside from the like Mortal Kombat-esque digitized graphics, which gave you the most realistic portrayal of Aerosmith's Joe Perry in video game history, the arcade cabinet is really the only way to play this game, because although there was a Super Nintendo version, I think it was just like you move the reticle around with the D-pad.
I grew up playing that SNES version a lot more than I should have. It's an inferior port of an already questionable game.
Well, okay, but the original game in the arcades was actually a lot of fun because you had like the vibrating machine gun thing. So when you pulled the trigger, it would just like shake violently, and then you'd like press like the second
Alien 3, the gun.
And it is like a goofy, like fun kind of in its stupidness, like I said, it really has nothing to do with Aerosmith. It really does.
You've said it's like cynical, but it's not like it still feels like fun in its own like weird way. Like,
imagine if like you can't really punify this, but imagine if like a game came out now that was called like Millennials the Game starring Pearl Jam. It wouldn't make any sense. It would be really weird. It's just like missing the mark on every conceivable level. But that's kind of its charm. I mean, this is really the only other thing I can really remember about this, because you can't rank this game very easily, because the only way to really appreciate it is to play the actual physical game.
As a game, it's okay, but it's not great. The thing is, let's be honest, like 99% of American-made arcade games are there to steal your money as efficiently as possible.
Like this game is a real money stealer. This game almost doesn't have like health power-ups or anything, and it's got heaps and heaps of enemies that will hit you, and you can't
just
possibly catch it.
Yeah, in comparison, like a more high quality, like a game like House of the Dead, I almost did beat on a single life once. You're not going to get
the closest approximate to this one is going to be another Midway game, or is it Activision? The Terminator game. Like that's pretty much exactly what it is. If you've ever played that one,
the only other differentiating factor is I may be completely misremembering this. Maybe I'm just remembering like really good like cabinet artwork, but I think it had like giant by arcade machine standard speakers on the top, because you'd actually have to kind of hear what people are saying and doing, because kids will really care whether you can tell exactly what Steven Tyler is mumbling to you.
You can actually understand it, but this game's not like, it's kind of like, this game would have been impressive in 1991. This game is way too late.
I mean, that's the thing, is Aerosmith was kind of lame even in 1991. It just, for some reason, they were it was kind of like for like people's like my friend's older brother's dad's kind of band.
Well, what I mean is, like, visually, the game has, like, some pretty cool parallax, really nice, big sprites, lots of sprites on screen, constantly stuff happening.
Yeah, they did a good thing where the enemies are, like, really brightly colored. They're, like, wearing some kind of weird, like, nuclear, like, biohazard jumpsuit type thing. They're, like, quarantining the world from rock and roll.
And their leader is Sonya Blade from Mortal Kombat 3, the same actress, Carrie Hoskins, so...
Who turns out she's giant mutant monster man.
Yeah, that's right.
Who quotes Monty Python.
Only an alien would want to kill rock and roll.
Although I
do want to talk about this game for a bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Bob is an expert on this game, so...
Yeah, I wrote an article about this, so I feel like I'm hopefully somewhat qualified. But, like, this game, like it says, a quarter muncher. I mean, let's take another Lycan game, like, say, Lethal Enforcers, where everyone's going to pop up and they give you like 2 seconds before they shoot you. And then you take this game where you have like a dozen guys on screen at once at all times. They're all shooting you. You've got like a half dozen missiles like going right into you at all times. And your health bar is more of a timer than anything, because you are going to die a lot.
Like, it's physically impossible to 1cc this, as far as I know. Like, it's not designed to be...
Yeah, it basically exists for, like some kid's birthday party where all the machines are set to free play at Aladdin's castle. It's that kind of thing. In fact, I think that's the only way I ever actually solved the ending of it.
Like
I was
I
at some
assume,
kid's
like,
birthday party.
the main demo for this game was putting it in like bowling alleys where you had like guys who would remember Aerosmith and be like, "Oh, Aerosmith, cool," and then just like put some money in and listen to Aerosmith and be like, "Cool, I feel like young" or something.
I do remember like a kind of, I don't want to call them clever, but they resemble vague cleverness. Thing like references in the game where I think there's one point where you're like in an office building and you get into an elevator and that ridiculous Aerosmith song "Love in an Elevator" plays, but it's in like an elevator music version, which nobody remembers because elevators don't play music anymore, but they used to. And so it's got like that kind of thing. It doesn't really matter if you are an Aerosmith fan and can catch the references. It's not important. None of this matters. But I mean, the game is hella crass, which you got to give it credit for. It is.
I mean, it has like a mutating machine that turns bikini women into like the cleaners from Resident Evil.
Yeah. Am I remembering this right? Did it also have like sassy like PTA moms in it?
I mean, the woman
probably
who taken over the world kind of is sassy PTA. Like she says, like
no
video games.
It's kind of like crossing Lethal Enforcers with a bubble tape commercial. Is I guess how I describe it for old people out there who remember bubble tape commercials.
Yeah, there's a lot of ridiculous crap in this game.
Your bus driver smells like garbage. Hates
like
bubble tape.
Oh my god, bubble tape. Do they even sell bubble tape anymore? Is that even a product?
No, it's been made completely illegal since some kid in like Minnesota choked to death on it or something. I'm guessing.
That's usually how everything gets discontinued. Yeah, the game is pretty audacious. Like you fight a giant skull made out of acid some point. Like one stage is just like attempting to destroy a heavily armored bus. It's like Desert Bus but with guns.
Oh, that's the coolest stage too. That's the one with all the objectified women with the chain gang stuff. Yeah.
It's an interesting premise, although it is also kind of a frustrating level in some ways. But
they're all frustrating levels.
It's kind of a frustrating game in general.
That's a good point. But it is at least pretty tongue-cheek and ridiculous. My favorite part is the boss at the end of the giant office level, where he's like this guy standing at a desk. You just shoot him once, he falls over, then he slaps his desk, and then it morphs into some sort of like giant flying robot. Arms.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like the game
go to your doom.
Yeah,
right.
Oh yeah, sorry, you spoke to.
The game is, for me, it deserves points, and I want to rank it not highly, but relatively highly, just because of all the it could have been. It didn't have to be clever or funny or anything like that. Like it would have swallowed just as many quarters if it was completely uninspired. But it was like incredibly inspired, crass. Marketing.
What I would say is it's kind of like it brought the exact same sense of humor that Mortal Kombat has to the game. Like that's basically it. Like they're just
kind of, but it's even more successful because Mortal Kombat still manages to take itself seriously somehow, which I don't.
I feel like Mortal Kombat kind of wanted to take itself seriously to have a story. This game doesn't care. It's not.
No,
trying
it
to
doesn't. It's just it's so
like
stupid.
Soulnado.
And the thing is there will never be another, like, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's still kind of serious. It's weird. It's like kind of like at the last moment, a game like this could have been put out there and still been taken at face value because
I want to put it like this. It's not a good game, but it is a fun game. You want to see what happens.
I'm not even sure it's fun. I think I think like the world and the energy that the game has is fun. But the actual game is not.
No, the actual game is not fun. But
not fun, then interesting. It's a very curious time capsule of a sort of game we'll probably never see again.
But I do appreciate that. This game is like, let's just have constant exploding blood and gore everywhere, and they don't. Like, there's no reason for it. It's just like everything explodes into gore. Everything explodes. Everything just breaks.
Yeah, it's just like the Beavis and Butthead era, by the way. This is post Beavis and Butthead for sure.
It's
right?
around, if not. I think Beavis and Butthead might have been still going around its time. It was close around.
I think it was like 94 or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, this was when this sort of like. Again, like Mortal Kombat and that sort of thing. Like this saturated, like everything has got to be blood and guts. Was now. This was the time for that.
When it comes to band games, it's not quite Kiss Psycho Circus, but I would rather play Revolution X than Journey Escape.
I guess the thing about Aerosmith is that the license is a bit weird in the sense that it's like, did they think that they they did this, like they wanted to make this game and they thought it was a good idea. It's not like you could see a Kiss game.
Like the Stone Temple Pilots guy was in rehab, so that's probably like their first choice. But
apparently they were going to make the game a Public Enemy, but then they couldn't, so they used Aerosmith instead.
Really?
I heard that.
That would have been really. I mean, that would have been kind of like maybe 2 years too late. But Aerosmith was like probably at that point like 12 or 13 years too late.
Well, because as you guys said, like Aerosmith didn't really ever curry this sort of feeling anyway. It's just kind of like
they were very corporate at that point. Like there was nothing rebellious, revolutionary, or au courant about them whatsoever. They were about as rock and roll as a Big Mac. Like
I mean, I guess we should mention that the goal of the game is to rescue Aerosmith, and then you get to attend an Aerosmith concert. Like beating the villain is incidental.
Subjects you to a fate worse than death.
That reminds me, I think you have to do like something special in each stage in order to find one of the Aerosmith members.
Hey,
right,
I'm
like super
somebody,
absurd.
the drummer from Aerosmith. Thank you for rescuing me.
Yeah, the concert's actually a lot like the Pleasure Dome from Smash TV. Now that I think.
Yeah, I mean, like this is. I said before that I think Carmen Sandiego was a product of its time. This game is like the definition of product of its time. You could make this game in 1994. That was it. Like you could make it exactly then.
Melt 1994 down into like a solid nugget of garbage video game stuff. Maybe
this is all like, obviously like something like this is all post RoboCop, post Terminator, post Alien. This is all of these like what people think is popular, and then we'll put Aerosmith in it because whatever.
I also want
So I guess what I'm trying to say is it goes right above Earthbound.
No.
I would like to rank this game. I think we've gotten as much as we can.
Like above Technocop. What do you guys think?
I'll put it below Toe Jam and Earl.
It's a pretty far metric, but I guess you technically will.
A Technocop is pretty much the metric. Like I would put it above Technocop because I feel like this game is really memorable for all the wrong reasons, but in a way like there'll never be anything like this again. And if there is, it will be totally tongue in cheek and not. Aerosmith was not in on this joke. If this was a joke, Aerosmith was not in on the joke.
I mean, the difference, of course, with this specific game is that this game was serious in its way. Like
in a way,
it's just so audacious. It's like what the South Africans call Zeph almost. Trashy, but admirable in a way.
I'll have to take your word for it. Although kudos for knowing other people's like.
I just learned that term recently.
Simply put, it's a bad game, but it's an amazing spectacle.
You have to, especially you got to play like even just watching it on YouTube, which is probably the second best way of experiencing it, is no comparison to actually playing it on an actual machine. Which nobody's going to be able to do. That's the hard part. Is like you can't do that anymore unless you go to some like a gaming convention. But you have to play it on like the rumbling like machine gun thing to really get like the weird mix of feelings. Like this is really stupidly fun. It's like it's a bad game. It's badly designed. But
given how bad the game is, like I personally wouldn't rank it that high. But if you're certain that the experience is improved with the giant rumbling gun, I'll allow it. Because
also the sound effect of when you launch your special weapon, which are like exploding CDs, I recall that having a pretty cool sound effect.
It is quite bassy. I remember the sound effect. But
here's
no
the
one's
thing.
been able to play this in its optimal form.
No, but you'll just have to take my word for it. And I know, dear listeners, that you do. So taking my word for it, like what I'm saying is that this is a game the kind of game that can never exist again. It is something trashy but special, and in its own way is like a special snowflake of a game that it just can't happen again. It is, I don't know. Does urine freeze? Can you crystallize urine into a snowflake? I don't really know how to explain it.
I mean, you can if you really want to.
Somebody can. We'll have to try this in a couple months.
I don't know. Wouldn't there be too much
some frozen urine, please?
Wouldn't there be too much salt in urine for it to freeze?
Jesus, why are we
it's
on
possible
this?
ammonia, right?
Here, I'm just going to suggest a place to slap it. How about
You've already suggested the place to slap it.
Oh, really? Below Technocop?
Do you think below? Was it above or below Technocop? Sorry.
I'm putting it above Technocop just because, like, this is a game that I think is worth. Technocop definitely is crass and stupid, but I mean, it doesn't have Aerosmith in it, and it would benefit from Aerosmith. Let's be honest.
So
It's a special gem of garbage. I don't know how else to explain it. It's just there's something about it that's
I think we've brought
magically
up that
terrible.
point like 5 times. I think.
Well, what this game has going for it is that it's the most bizarre product ever produced.
Pretty much.
It's up there. It's up there. Yeah.
And for the record,
I appreciate that it exists. I just don't want to play it.
I'd say
I don't recommend. You can't.
Like, I think that's the point that we're trying to emphasize. Like, you should not play this game, but you should still appreciate it.
Don't pay money to play it.
Okay.
How about that?
Okay.
And
But the real problem is the only way to truly, as you said, enjoy this game in any real sense is to play it on the stupidly large machine. And that's something that arcade games did. That spectacle of indulgence of a machine is something special. And as I mentioned, Alien 3 The Gun is a pretty nice game. But you grab those guns, and I have played Alien 3 The Gun. It's the most glorious experience ever.
Use the play surface on which the gun rests like a mirror that you can snort coke off of, because that was true of Revolution X.
That was the same thing for me in Beastbuster's Second Nightmare. The gun on that machine is redonk. It's awesome.
And also, LA Machine
all right,
Guns.
so is everybody okay right above Technocop?
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, sure. As one more party statement, Steven Tyler is definitely a better person than Gene Simmons, if nothing else. So.
True.
Are we allowed to say that?
I'm allowed to say it. And Satenga's allowed to say it.
He's allowed to have an opinion. You can't sue someone for an opinion, right?
This is an awkward,
I don't know. I don't have anything funny to say about Gene Simmons. I just there is a heart attack with his name on it that has taken its damn sweet time.
Don't give up! Let's go! If you're watching this, then they've taken over. It's up to you now. Find our car and stop the New Order. Remember, music is the weapon.
Okay, our last game for the show is Final Fantasy VII, which is nominated by Poor Heart on Tumblr. So you guys can hit us up on Tumblr too.
We have like nominations on Tumblr?
At least this one we do.
Huh. And we only have one nomination for Final Fantasy VII.
Amazingly enough, I feel like people probably suspect that we already ranked it and they're just too lazy to click on it. bit.ly/47k games.
Yeah,
well,
I mean,
I think I want to give some faith in people. I might have wised up to the fact that any discussion about Final Fantasy VII eventually tends to devolve into rather heated arguments somehow about whether it's the greatest game ever and Jesus made it or not. I don't know.
First released, developed and published by Jesus.
Is it Jesus? I think so.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, Squaresoft. You're right.
Right.
Developed by Jesus, published by Squaresoft. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and they were called Square back then. Just Square. They weren't Square Enix. This was just Square before they bankrupt themselves making a movie about Final Fantasy that wasn't about Final Fantasy. Let's talk about Final Fantasy VII.
First released in Japan on January 31st, 1997. Released about 6 months later, I think, in the rest of the world, more or less. 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, September-ish.
Yeah, 1997. Wow. It's hard to, I don't want to say too much about this game because I feel like, although I have mostly good things to say about it,
I'm going to be the bad guy this time. Like, I said that during Final Fight, but this time I mean it.
All right.
At least one person's going to hate me by the end of this episode, and I'm okay with that.
Be a hateful sack if you want. I mean, that's fine. We can't stop you.
Final Fantasy VII's in a weird bubble. I think it's as valid to criticize, it's to condemn it as it is to exalt it.
Can we get just a 1 or 2 minute short summary of Final Fantasy VII, just for the three people who are 10 years old?
Because I cannot do that.
No, sure. That because I'm a effing nerd, I can definitely do that. Basically, there's this resistance group called Avalanche, which I don't think the acronym's ever explained. It's just in all caps, like Avalanche. But they're a bunch of so-called eco-terrorists with Cloud Strife and Barrett Wallace and like three or four other guys who died pretty early in the game. They're basically in the giant techno city of Midgar, which is like super Blade Runner. It's every cyberpunk cliche you can think of, all mashed into this giant portion of the world. And they're waging war against the Shinra Corporation, guerrilla war, trying to blow up all their establishments.
You have 1.5 minutes left.
Yeah, they basically attempt to raid the headquarters after Shinra blows up, like, an entire segment of Midgar for, I forget exactly why, because they're jerks, apparently. But they find evidence then that bastard in a black coat by the name of Sephiroth is also doing things counter to Shinra, and then, like, it goes into this plot of how Cloud used to be on the same team as Sephiroth until he learned like that he was the son of an insane scientist and an eldritch woman that came from the comet in the sky, and that like he's a bastard superhuman who then wants to reclaim his right and like bring the world to oneness by blowing it up. So then Cloud and all his teammates have to stop him.
That's Final Fantasy VII.
And
that's the best I can do. It goes cuckoo bananas.
I mean, the point here is that
how many discs was it? Was it 4 or 3? I think it was 3.
3 actually. 8 and 9 were 4. That was I can imagine it was only 3 discs because like its graphical tech wasn't quite as powerful. I remember the third disc being really short as well. I guess the story itself wasn't as extensive.
So long story short, the plot of this game is terrible, but.
You're kind of.
But
I was going to say the plot was like the best feature, so that doesn't sound promising.
I don't think you played the same game.
We can talk about the plot a bit when we sort of get into it, but I mean, essentially,
all I'm willing to talk about. Like, I think that the plot is the only bad thing about this game.
Well,
the plot. You got to contextualize that in 1997, to Western audiences especially, the plot was like, whoa, like gamers were blown away.
Unless you played Final Fantasy VI. Or Final Fantasy III, as it was.
The other Final Fantasies, they may have had kind of like, I guess, like less convoluted, less stupid plots, but they didn't have the presentation that 7 has. And I think that's
pretty close. Like, I want to say, like, except for the story parts of it, I have nothing but good things to say about Final Fantasy VII.
Except for all the cutscenes that are very pretty for the time, I'll be honest. There is very little in this game that Earthbound hasn't done better.
Yeah. Okay, so
it's kind of apples and oranges.
Earthbound is pretty. I mean, Earthbound as far as it's. Well, I'm not gonna criticize Earthbound's gameplay. I'm gonna say that Earthbound does really different stuff. It's kind of on its own planet. But in a lot of ways, it's a very basic JRPG. Like, it just does a couple little things different. And the genius of Earthbound, gameplay-wise, is that the little things it does different actually change the minute-to-minute gameplay quite a bit.
The thing is, for me, what I always appreciate about Earthbound more than anything were all the little improvements, quality of life stuff, things that just made things a little less frustrating. And it all came together into something that was just so much nicer to play. And going back into Final Fantasy VII feels like regressing.
I can see that, but hear me out.
I mean, Final Fantasy VII. Okay, so Earthbound. I don't want to talk too much about Earthbound because this is about Final Fantasy VII. But Earthbound is, it's like a comment, a sidestep from JRPGs. Final Fantasy VII is like JRPGs +1. Here it is, guys. The next generation of JRPG.
It is Final Fantasy VI on CDs. That's basically what it is. And I mean that in the best possible way because that was a big deal at the time.
It was
Final Fantasy VI, story-wise, Final Fantasy VI is just Final Fantasy VII that makes sense, that you can actually remember what it's talking about. It is. It deals with all the same stuff. It has in my opinion, much more memorable villain, much more memorable characters, and it has more characters, by the way. Definitely. And it has basically the same battle system, and like the materia system and the Esper system is pretty much identical, almost.
I thought 7 was often compared to 4's battle system.
I
Sorry
would
if I'm getting sidetracked.
4 really was just a job system, battle system where you can't change jobs. It was very much like Final Fantasy 4 was very much like let's do Final Fantasy 1 but make it kind of fun, which I really like, but it's not a game that I think is worth going back to. Whereas I feel like Final Fantasy 3, Final Fantasy 5, Final Fantasy 6 are. And Final Fantasy 7 I think is also a game that's worth going back to because in my opinion, I think it's pretty good. And I think that story accepted and like the kind of like the dumb Chocobo stuff and all that stuff, accepting that, right?
I mean, I would say you could say the Chocobo stuff is dumb, but I know it was popular when this game was new. They went nuts for that. Like even the Chocobo stuff, they were just like, man, you gotta do this and you gotta do this, and there's all this other Chocobo stuff, and you can do this. Like, I mean, even these like dumb little inclusions improved the game's quality to people when it came out.
Yeah, I don't want to jump the gun too much, but there's a trope name, Sidetracked by the Gold Saucer, named after the very mini-game heavy, like giant super Disney amusement park you reach about a quarter or third of the way into the game. And I guess that place just looks impressive, and I wanted to touch upon how for its time, the character models definitely don't hold up in the least, but the rendered backgrounds are pretty fantastic.
Amazing. And let me, look, Final Fantasy VI is a fantastic game. I feel like if you're going to play one of the two, play Final Fantasy VI because I feel like you're going to get more out of the story.
Yeah, let's get it clear. 6 is by all accounts a better game, but 7 still holds its place in history.
It does, and here's what's special about 7. Like Final Fantasy VI is kind of like the beginning of Final Fantasy as we know it, because what it does is it kind of abandons the Dungeons and Dragons type. Kind of like it's like an anime Dungeons and Dragons up to a point. Then Final Fantasy VI abandons that and says, no, what we're going to do is we're going to make like a sort of unique world, sort of unique art direction, and we're going to put more memorable characters into it, although I do like the characters of Final Fantasy IV. And we're going to kind of start tweaking the battle system in ways that are other than the job system, which was also really good and I like it. And I like Final Fantasy Tactics as well and stuff like that. So I'm not slagging like the traditional Final Fantasy gameplay, but I'm saying like Final Fantasy VI was like, let's find a way of doing like the basic Final Fantasy non-job system thing and kind of adding more customization to it, adding the same kind of customization you have with a job system where you can like have different abilities and different jobs and master certain abilities so you can use them even when you've changed jobs and all that. It does that, but it's with the Esper thing. But the thing about, as you said, Satanga, is the art direction in it is that like you've got these like drawn or rendered backgrounds that in a way are really primitive because all they are like mostly static backgrounds or like kind of animated GIF style backgrounds. Yeah. But they are in many cases absolutely gorgeous, even to this day. And what makes the game cool is its setting, is its sense of place, is its art direction. Like, I mean, I feel like I harp on this way too often on this show, but that's one of the cool things that games can do that movies can't. Whereas movies, you can have a really cool looking movie, but a movie's job is to tell a story. And if you don't tell a good story, your movie sucks. Like, it's like you've got a cool looking commercial is what you've got. With a game, you could have a kind of a crappy story that still looks really cool and is fun to play, and that is what I think you get with Final Fantasy VII. I solicited this question to our loyal and lovely and attractive and intelligent Twitter followers, which was that, like, tell me where the Final Fantasy world. What were its antecedents? What were its precedents? What kind of anime or movies or something like that? It's a lot of Blade Runner. But there's kind of a earthiness to it, a grittiness to it, a nostalgia aspect to it that you don't see too now. I guarantee you, as soon as I say this, somebody's going to be like, actually, the such and such OVA, which was released in 1995. But you know what? That's
well.
Fine. Right,
I mean, if you want me to step in with my knowledge of kind of older Japanese.
Go ahead, Weeb. I've got my stopwatch ready.
There's this sort of like there's a lot of interest in early Japanese CG, which was like a lot of biomechanical and all this sort of like metal people fusion sort of thing. Like there was this real. It's sometimes described as like cyberpunk or sci-fi horror, but it's kind of like this famous Gadget, a game called Gadget, and there's like Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is a movie. There's like this weird like mechanical metal fetishism that was going on in computer generated graphics in Japan, and I think that a lot of the world of Final Fantasy VII has got elements of that when they bring in that sort of not computers but like mechanical stuff, mixing that in with the traditional earthy lifestyle, which is obviously that's a big part of Final Fantasy VII's plot.
Right.
And I think that this is a big budget rendition of a lot of those slightly more underground thing. Like Japanese cyberpunk stuff was very much of what Final Fantasy VII is, and you can see a lot of it in Final Fantasy VII.
I mean, people, the stuff that people pointing me back to, which is stuff I am familiar with because I am a dork of a certain age. So I know I've seen Akira, I've seen Bubblegum Crisis, I've seen Evangelion and all that stuff. I've paid my dues.
FF7 is really emblematic of all that media at the time.
But it's kind of...
And Ghost in the Shell, of course. Don't forget Ghost in the Shell because it's kind of...
And Ghost of the Shell, most of all. But I'd say even Ghost of the Shell is basically Blade Runner. And Final Fantasy VII is not Blade Runner. Final Fantasy VII is something beyond that. It is the closest thing I could compare it to in terms of like, now I guarantee you after this is out there and I can't take it back and I can't correct myself and all that after it's too late, somebody will point something out to me that I missed and could never.
We've already been wrong like 27 times.
Oh yes.
So
the Yoshi's Island thing. That was a big deal, And that
even
was
in this sentence, we've probably said at least like 8 things wrong with Final Fantasy VII because we're not that experts.
And yet, once it gets recorded and committed to posterity, it somehow becomes righter than ever. And all the facts you marshal against it only increase its veracity. But
do continue.
Yes, I will. So, I mean, but the thing is like what I love about it is whether it invented this on its own or whether it just was really good at stealing from the right sources. I don't care. The point is that this is a video game that its art design is unique. It is it's very anime, like late 80s, early 90s, like cyberpunk anime. It's very Blade Runner, but it has a lot of extra stuff to it. There are villages here. Like one of my favorite early parts of the game is where you see this crushed, decimated playground. And it's like one of the sentimental parts of the game where you meet the Eris character who dies shortly afterwards and never comes back. And no matter what, but maybe she can come back. I don't know.
The first time RPG did that, but it's probably like the most notable example. It's
a poignant part of the game, but there are other parts. Like you go to like little villages throughout like the latter part of the game that all have their own identity, and they seem lived in. They seem real in a way that even I would say Ghost in the Shell didn't accomplish, but certainly no game that I played before this.
I think like a big part of what you're saying is that I don't know if we mentioned it yet. Final Fantasy VII, they spent a shed load of money on this game. Like even like in terms of art, like there's so much money poured into this.
I want to say this was the game that made Nintendo realize they totally blew it when their deals with Sony fell through.
I don't know whether they realized that they blew it because they still made a lot of money.
Well, but yeah, true.
But like like with this game,
the thing it's the thing that sold me on CD-based systems because
it sold everyone on CD-based systems. This is
it was the game. I was like, well, I can't say like, oh, well, surely on the PC or on the N64 there'll be something like this. Well, on the PC maybe, but eventually, but it was a showcase. It was the reason to buy a PlayStation, basically. Like if Twisted Metal didn't get you, this one did. But yeah, I mean, it felt real and believable in a very fantastic sci-fi but oddly nostalgic kind of way. And the only thing I can compare it to would be how I would say one of its biggest influence is the original Star Wars, the very first Star Wars movie, not the two movies that came after it, but the original, which was very much a classic Hollywood adventure movie, like a Western or like an adventure serial or something that just happened to be set in a sci-fi setting. But everything about it felt oddly nostalgic and real in like the Hollywood sense of the term. And that's what you got with a lot of these environments. Like what's the Cosmic Canyon?
Oh, Cosmo Canyon.
Yeah, Cosmo Canyon. Like literally I did not play this game. I've not played this game for probably since not 97, but I'd say like maybe 98. And I still remember a lot of the environments in it.
This may be due exactly to the PlayStation's power, but like
not power. It is the exact opposite. It was due to like the PlayStation's just strength of being able to store gigantic by 1997 standard images.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
That's what it was. That was what it was due to. It was a very, very basic and simple capability of CD-ROMs that you could look up relatively high-res images and just leave them.
As I said, like it's literally like Square could spend the money to make the images, and the PlayStation could show you the images. That's
the movies don't look so great anymore, and definitely the in-engine cutscenes look like garbage. I mean, it's like popping polygons. It's like disjointed, like those little artist models. They have like a little dude with like the different like hinged joints that you put them in different poses so artists can draw stuff. I have no artistic talent, so I don't really know what you do with them. But that's basically what they look like. If you painted that 5 different colors, that's what you'd get. But that was the technology of the time. But the environments are what you remember about it, and that's what gives the game its personality. And its personality is why people care about the game. The character design is not great, but it does have a Mr. T-esque character, which is Dogs Bauer-like in a way.
Yeah, Bauer's pretty cool.
I just want to say the character designs are pretty good in terms of.
I don't feel like they're as good as Final Fantasy VI, but yeah.
The characters have different silhouettes. Like they actually have a bunch of different shapes because now that they have 3D.
True, because they're composed of like basic geometrical shapes.
They're geometrical shapes, but they are different.
Like 6
sizes,
triangles and
colors.
like a sphere and a.
It's different. Final Fantasy, historically, all the characters had to sort of be homogenized to the small little portraits kind of that they got, or the little like tiny
sprites. But those could be very expressive in a way that a jumping polygon clock
I gotta wonder,
is not.
If they had like the high detail battle models, why didn't they not just use those more often?
I think that they didn't have the ability to display it for whatever reason. Could have been an issue with animation compression. Could have been an issue with skeletal compression. There's a lot of things that took a lot of effort to overcome for the PlayStation. It was very underpowered. Xerxes is not lying when he says that the PlayStation struggled to do anything. It was not a very powerful system.
Yeah, I mean, this game really struggled even more to do what Final Fantasy VIII did, and struggled even harder for Final Fantasy IX at the cost of some rather slowness in that game's process.
Well, like each iteration of Final Fantasy on the PlayStation, they squeezed more out because that was, they had that understanding of the system. But Final Fantasy VII shouldn't be underestimated. Like, even though, it's like, it's crappy polygons, but, compare it to anything else in 97, it doesn't look bad. Like, the characters walking around look fine.
Right. I mean, so your alternative for what it could have been, look at Final Fantasy Tactics, which I believe was developed at about the same time, was released about the same time. And that's what it could have been. It could have been a game like that. If they wouldn't have called Final Fantasy Tactics, if they would have called it Final Fantasy VII, people would have accepted it. But I don't know that. I mean, it has the strategy and like the movement things and all that. But I mean, it would not have been that different. And people would have just accepted it, and that would have become what Final Fantasy is. But instead, they doubled down on, let's make this a spectacle. And I think it worked. And I think unlike 8 and 9, which are not bad JRPGs, but I enjoyed them, but I don't really remember that much about them. Whereas with Final Fantasy VII, I feel like there's something...
Xerxes has been talking for a while, and I know he's pretty positive on the game. Unfortunately, for me, it's not quite the same. I don't know what it is. I never really grew up with JRPGs, and I never really, to be completely honest, really enjoyed a lot of them. Even this one, it's supposed to be, a lot of people would say it's one of the best ones of all time, but it just feels like any other for me, and it's a genre that's just really tedious for me.
If you don't like the genre, though, I mean, can you hold it against the game? It's kind of like, I mean, I'm not saying like your opinion is invalid. It's not. Like, I don't really want to play a game like this again. Like, I've played more than enough of these games for the rest of my life. I have better things to do with my time. But
like, I really know I shouldn't keep coming back to Earthbound. It's just so hard not to, because Earthbound does so many things I like, and it's frustrating to see that no other game wants to do these clearly good ideas.
Well, I mean, yeah, but you got like, okay, about the same time as Earthbound, you got Chrono Trigger, which is what a lot of people who worked on, I believe, Final Fantasy VII, that was the thing they did right before it. And that's a pretty different game too. Like, this is Final Fantasy VII is like a basic JRPG. You're right about that. And you should hold it against it that after doing Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy III and et cetera, it isn't that much different. I guess what I'm saying is that it was the first using the technology it had in a very effective way and doing it in a way that has not really been matched. Like, nobody talks about how subsequent Final Fantasy games look. They don't matter.
With the Final Fantasy VII, I don't know if we've properly completely covered this, but I consider it basically the first blockbuster game in a lot of ways. Like, it had a tremendous budget. It had enormous advertising behind it. Like, this is like you couldn't exist in 1997 and not know about Final Fantasy VII.
You might not know what it was, which I recall not a lot of people understanding what it was.
No, you didn't have to know what it was.
You would know
but
that
it's just like
something called Final Fantasy VII was out there and could be consumed for money, but you didn't know what it was or how you were supposed to appreciate it.
They didn't care if you knew what it was. You just had to be like, hey, Final Fantasy VII, yeah, that. Like, that's really important, though, because, like, Dragon's Quest, you're like, okay, I guess that's a game that exists, but I doubt you could sort of... In Japan, it's huge, obviously, but Final Fantasy VII is one of the first JRPGs, I would say, that was brand name everywhere. Not just Japan, not just the US, it's Europe, everywhere. Everyone knew about this game because they spent so much money, and it was pretty good. And at the same time, Sony had basically created, not necessarily deliberately, but they had gained this huge market with the PlayStation. Like, they had hit people that weren't always buying games. They hit teens, like all these people that were kind of like, I don't know about video games for babies. And then Square's like, hey, buy our game.
Check this out. His sword is huge and his hair is huge.
People say shit.
And they'll be like,
but it's huge.
Like, it's got like a storyline and it's dramatic. And
it is. Real. I mean, granted, the storyline is no more interesting or dramatic or good than the Final Fantasy games that came before it, but it feels like something, Final Fantasy VII, the thing about it is, do we ever need another game like this again? No. Did it make games after it worse? In a way, yeah, it did. Because they just doubled down on the stupid plot. But
this game doomed JRPGs, basically. Well, it made them unbelievably popular. Like Final Fantasy VI was a popular game.
Street Fighter II doomed 2D fighters. I mean, you gotta, it made it popular.
I mean, the thing is, where Street Fighter II was never, I don't think, people were like, oh, Street Fighter II is great. What a great game. But they kept trying to beat Street Fighter II. I don't think everyone was trying to beat Final Fantasy VII. They were just like, let's make a game like Final Fantasy VII. Let's just make
Xeno. What's it called?
Xenogears.
Yeah. I was going to say Xenoblade, but that's not the same thing. Or not, I was going to say Xenosaga, but that's not the same thing. Xenogears is not trying to beat Final Fantasy VII at its own game. I guarantee you it is. But the thing is they were, even if you were trying to do that, you were failing, because that's what turned people off from the genre, was that they didn't advance far enough beyond Final Fantasy VII. But you can't hold that against Final Fantasy VII. You can
I'm saying it's not Final Fantasy VII's fault, but it's so big that it the whole genre is defined by Final Fantasy VII, regardless of whether you like games before it.
In a way,
Final Fantasy VII just came in and was like, hey, everyone, check me out.
Yeah, I can see that.
Start ranking this?
Yeah, I would put it at the very top above everything.
Yeah, I see no problem with that.
See, what's at the very top? Like what?
I've been thinking about this, and I know no one's going to agree with me. I don't expect them to. But I was going to say, Probably like maybe above Riven.
I would put it above Riven as well, but I don't know. I would put it substantially farther than you would.
I mean, I know that sounds kind of low.
Well, to be fair,
I don't see enjoying this game. That's just me.
We did vote Riven a lot lower than I thought it would turn out, so...
Riven is... But you see, we're voting Riven after Myst. We know that Myst isn't on there, but everybody knows Myst exists. We know that other Final Fantasy games aren't on there. But Final Fantasy VII, I wish more games of its kind went as far as Final Fantasy VII did in terms of creating a unique environment. Something that, like a place that feels real but isn't, and a place that has like a unique visual style to it.
So many RPGs at the time struggled to even do that. Like, the Saturn had like Grandier and stuff. Like, let's just make 2D games, but with nicer 2D graphics. Like, they didn't. Final Fantasy stepped in and was like, we're going to actually make a proper 3D-ish RPG, and we're going to try our best. And they did it, and
they went.
Worked.
Yeah, they went with the strengths of the hardware they had.
Where would you guys rank this?
I want to put it below Kicks, above Alien Soldier, and I understand that nobody's going to agree with me on that, but I'm just saying, like, I just wish that the effort and inventiveness that went into designing this game, especially visually, were... Visually,
it's great. I can't deny that. That's the best thing about it. No contest.
So, I mean, I would probably put this... I'd actually put it above Bionic Commando. That's where I would personally put it.
Yeah, okay.
Nah.
I know. I'm just saying.
Bobbinator wants to put it all the way down by...
Well,
I think
I'm out insane. So you do what you need to.
I would like to hear from Satenga because he hasn't even weighed in yet, I think.
I admit I have found very little to say about FF7 in the end. You guys had it all covered. But can you just put it one tick below Bionic Commando? I mean, Super Mario Bros. 3.
Below Bionic Commando. So where do you think I was too low, or do you think I was too high?
I agree it should go really high. I just personally like Bionic Commando more.
It's still a solid game. If you like JRPGs, then you're going to probably like Final Fantasy
VII. If you don't, as long as you don't play too many of them, you might still want to check it out because I think it is fun to look at, and it feels like I would not say play Final Fantasy VIII. I would not say play any Final Fantasy game after Final Fantasy VII,
except
unless you really like JRPGs.
Except for
right, yeah, did Tactics, right? Maybe play Tactics because it's got like a real system to it. But you even if you hate JRPGs, like play at least like 5 hours of Final Fantasy VII because that's where all the best stuff happens usually.
Like, because I mean, with Final Fantasy VII, I would also say in terms of and why I think the ranking should be pretty high. Despite it is kind of like it doesn't get too weighed down with its systems. They're complicated enough, but it hasn't reached the point where it hasn't reached like pinnacle JRPG where it needs lots and lots and lots and lots of systems to try and keep the players. No, it's like, no, you don't have to grind too much. You don't have to understand too much. You can actually play the game. It's there. And the environments are nice and the character variety is pretty good.
And the music's beautiful.
Quicks, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with its virtues. I think the story is, again, it's garbage, but I mean, Satenga, where like you agree with me or you disagree? Because right now I'm the lowest ranking besides Bobbinator, so it's kind of between me and him.
Maybe above Kicks, just a bit, just one step above.
Because I mean, are we saying that Final Fantasy VII as a game compared to Drill Dozer, like which one's better? Like, is Drill Dozer
is fine?
I like Drill Dozer better than Final Fantasy VII. I'm just saying, like, Drill Dozer is a better game. But Final Fantasy VII's virtues are mostly in its design, its vision. So Final Fantasy VII, above Kicks, below Drill Dozer. Come at us, bros. Okay, that's all for this episode of Hardcore Gaming 101.net's Top Games podcast. Special thanks goes out to K Kickflip, at Meat Dimension TJ, at Blues Dance, at Bonus Lizard, and Poor Heart on Tumblr. for nominating these fantastic games. And thanks as well to those of you we haven't gotten to yet, where I promise we're your top priority. And thanks as well to my lovely co-hosts and compatriots and our editor, Jeff Rudd, and our theme song composer, Muteki. And of course, thanks to the support and feedback of listeners like you. You can support this podcast by making a small monthly donation at patreon.com/HG101. I know I did. And you can also help us out by following at HG_101 and at GC9X on Twitter. But most importantly, help us claw our way into the zeitgeist by getting on iTunes, subscribing to HG101, the podcast, and giving us 5 stars in your review. Do it, or boom bop, boom ba-doom, ba, you suck. Boom, boom, ba. Until next time, keeping it real. Harambe.